Our affiliate, WFTS in Tampa, has more of this bizarre case, everything that happened today inside that courtroom.
Were you able to draw any conclusions on whether I committed any murder in this case?
Yes, that's why I arrested you.
Without hesitation, Tom Dirks, the lead detective in the 2018 double murder case, doubled down on his decision to take Ronnie Oneal into custody.
Did you say that I didn't kill Kenyatta Barron in self-defense?
I'm not going to say that, no. I arrested you for her murder.
Detective Dirks was the last witness called by the state. It was then O'Neal's chance to call witnesses to the stand. He had 3, and his defense only lasted 30 minutes. We were told by the judge to not show the faces of 2 of them, a young neighbor who says he saw what happened outside that night through a bedroom window, and the mother of another child O'Neal fathered a few years ago.
And he stood over her, did this like striking thing like 3 times, and he shot her.
And how many times is that again?
3.
3 times. And you're sure about that, right?
Positive.
Positive. You've seen 3 strikes.
Positive.
When the mother took the stand, O'Neal asked her to confirm she and Kenyatta Barron were fighting a few weeks prior to the murders.
Yes, we were. We never got along, like, at all.
His 3rd witness was a Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputy who pulled 911 dispatch records but did not review them. Throughout this entire trial, O'Neal has focused heavily on the cell phone records and seemed to be trying to convey that a 911 call he made was missing.
Do you see a call at 3:52?
No, I don't.
I wonder why that is.
Okay, again, you're just here to ask questions, not make comments. What's your next question of the witness?
I have no more questions because we're really done talking.
That witness was excused, and when the judge asked if he had any other witnesses to call, he said,
Not at this time, y'all.
Well, now's the time.
Well, not really, but.
It's it's a bit of a mess, but this is the way our system works. You've got a defendant who wants to represent himself. He gets to represent himself. Let's bring in our special guest joining us tonight in Phoenix, Arizona, the attorney who represented Jodi Arias, the author of the book series Trapped with Ms. Arias, Kirk Nurmi, back with us. Kirk, first, what's your reaction to this whole situation? Death penalty case, defendant representing himself.
Yeah, it's extremely bizarre. You know, what you just said is so true, though. We have that absolute right. The defendants have that absolute right to represent themselves. And strangely enough, that is not affected by the death penalty. That is not affected by the state. I'm sure the judge here warned him over and over again before she granted his right to represent himself that he was going to have to be held to the standards of an attorney, not only throughout the trial, but through the sentencing phase to determine whether or not the jury is going to give him life or death. But if he is so obstinate that he wants to represent himself, ultimately under the law, under the Sixth Amendment, there's nothing a judge can do about it. Her hands were tied in this situation, and thus we see Mr. Oneal representing himself.
All right, how about the fact that he chose not to testify in his own defense? I mean, he's been doing nothing but talking, right? Because he's representing himself. So the jury is hearing him. And then when it's time to tell his story, he declines.
But I'll go back to what you said earlier. He's talked and talked and talked throughout the course of this trial. He's been heard, but he hasn't had to go through cross-examination, right? So when he's up there, and we see this with defendants who represent themselves, we saw a little clip there. He's almost trying to inject his own testimony into his cross-examination. And of course, he has closing argument. He can make whatever argument he wants to make without having to face cross-examination. At most, the state can object to what he's saying to, but he can pretty much argue whatever he wants to argue without having it put to the crucible of cross-examination.
And ultimately, I think the decision not to testify bolsters the finding of the judge that he knows what he's doing. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He knows if I don't testify, they can't ask me questions. It's not like this guy is totally, out of his mind in doing all this. He's smart enough to realize the limitations that prosecutors will have if he doesn't testify. So I think this decision, I don't know if it's going to help or hurt one way or the other, but at the end of the day, I think it confirms that he knows what he's doing.
Well, yeah, I think it will, Vinny, and I think we see the judge making pains to make this comments on the record, because keep in mind, when we're talking about a death penalty case, if he is ultimately sentenced to death, that's going to go up all the way to the Federal Circuit Court, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So his competency to stand trial is one thing, but the court illustrating and the record illustrating that he is making some wise decisions show that his death sentence, if that's what he ultimately receives, was a product of a lawful, proper judicial process under the 6th and 8th Amendment, and therefore the execution can go forward. So in that regard, the court is doing an excellent job of kind of letting Mr. Oneal dig his own grave if that's what the jury believes is appropriate.
All right, there were so many different unusual moments during the course of this case that is going to continue on Monday. Here he is now cross-examining the police officer who has adopted his son, who survived that night, testified earlier in the trial. This is an unreal, amazing moment. Let's take a listen.
I told her my wife and I'd be happy to take him.
And did you and your wife subsequently, in fact, adopt as your own son?
We did on November 25th, 2019.
Thank you, sir, for all that you've done. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart to the top of my head.
You'll never see anything like that in any other case. You've got the defendant representing himself thanking the officer who's a witness in this case for adopting his son. What's the impact of that on this case, on this trial, and if we ever get there, the death penalty?
Well, I don't think it's going to have a lot of impact on the verdict, right? But I think your question as it relates to the death penalty is an important one, because remember, when a jury considers whether to sentence someone to life or death, they do so on all the evidence, on everything they've seen. So will Mr. Oneal's gratitude that he's expressing to the man that adopted his son be enough for them to show mercy? Perhaps. I don't know if that was his intent or if the gratitude was genuine. It seemed genuine. But ultimately they can consider everything they've heard, and that will be one of the things that the jury will likely consider when they're deciding whether or not to sentence Mr. Oneal to life or death.
All right, closing arguments are on Monday. Let's take a look at Ronnie Oneal during his opening statement, and then we'll talk about what may happen on Monday. Let's take a look.
The evidence is going to show that I called 911 during Kenyatta Barron's 911 call. But all of a sudden, it ends up after I called Kenyatta, after Kenyatta Barron's call was made. Now I'm calling 911. But originally, I called 911 without even knowing she called 911 during her call. But the evidence is going to show that your representatives and law enforcement, local law enforcement, wanted to make it seem like I'm some kind of menace to society. And I ran after killing Kenyatta Barron, knowing that authority was on the way to kill my own children. I wonder why I would do something like that for no reason. And I'm standing here competent as can be, representing myself today.
All right, Kirk, I'm not going to ask you to try to make sense of that, but he's distracted. He's focused on issues that may have little or nothing to do with the outcome of this trial. You know, who made the 911 call first and all of that. What do you expect to happen on Monday when he has his last opportunity to speak in front of this jury during the guilt phase?
Yeah, honestly, Vinny, I think we're going to see more of the same, and maybe I'll attempt to make a little sense of what I saw in that clip. is that it seems Mr. Oneal believes that he's the victim of some sort of conspiracy upon law enforcement. The records have been altered, testimonies have been altered, things of that nature, right? So I think what he's trying to express is his anger and his righteous indignation towards what has happened to him, towards this conspiracy against him. So I have no reason to believe that we're not going to see the same things Monday, if not more so during closing argument, as long as he follows rules of decorum, because I believe he's going to feel like his freedom, the rest of his life, and maybe his life itself is at stake based on this conspiracy. And he is very upset by this conspiracy and wants the jury to understand his emotion and connect to that emotion. That is, I think, what his desire is in this representation.
Let's listen to a little bit more of that opening statement.
Anything that I may have said, they exacerbated it and made me say it consecutively over and over like Allahu Akbar, which I may have said once or twice. But they wanted to make me seem like a terrorist. And so you hear it 8 or 9 times, and you hear me calling Kenyatta Barron a bitch and a whore.
So what is the jury's takeaway from this, right? I mean, they've gotten to hear a lot from him. I mean, that opening statement was one thing, but he's had a range of emotions during this entire thing. Does that humanize him in any sense, where maybe a jury will be less likely to see him as a monster if they believe he committed the murders and they convict him when we get to that penalty phase? Is there any way, in some strange twist, that all of this could help him in the penalty phase?
It's possible. He's showing a lot of raw human emotion. I don't know that the raw human emotion that he's displaying is really going to land with the jury, right? We see these people, this erratic behavior. Could it help him? Could jurors feel like he has some sort of mental disability, some sort of erratic behavior, some sort of mood disorder? Possibly, but Vinny, it's so hard to tell without any, right now we don't know any mental health assessments, anything of that nature. So whether this behavior is consistent with that and whether that will affect the penalty phase, that's going to be the real question.
You know, the other part of death penalty cases is, there's so much scrutiny done of attorneys who try death penalty cases, right? You've got to be qualified and this experience, everything else. And here's a guy tried his first case and it's a death penalty case.
Yeah, Vinny, and that's what goes back to what we were talking about earlier about that, those statements the judges made on the record about his competency, that sort of thing, because it's meant to address just that issue, right? Yeah, the standards for defense attorneys are high. I mean, I can tell you when I was a death penalty attorney, it was legal education after legal education. We had to stay up to snuff because we knew that every case was that important. Every case was going to the U.S. Supreme Court. But when somebody makes that choice, if they give that competent representation, they kind of waive that idea that, they had an incompetent attorney. They're really setting themselves up for disaster, if you will, when it comes to the Court of Appeals, because they made the bet, and I think the federal courts will say that he's going to have to lie in it moving forward should he be sentenced to death. Unbelievable.
All right, Kirk's going to stay with us. When we come back, there's a new trial starting in Colorado. They're going through jury selection right now involving a man named Mark Redwine. This case involves his son Dylan, who, when he was 13 years old, went missing. They found him about a mile or so from Redwine's house. Mother and father had been split up. He was visiting with dad. This family went on Dr. Phil, 2 episodes of Dr. Phil when Dylan was still missing. And now, finally, years later, Mark Redwine on trial for the murder of his son. We'll have a preview when we come back.